So welcome everyone to the ninth YI Huddle series. I'm Arushi. I'm a program manager of digital initiatives at India Bioscience. And YI Huddle is a webinar series that was started by India Bioscience. Though we call it as a webinar setup, it's actually set up as a meeting where everyone can switch on their videos, audios, and can talk. And it's supposed to be a conversational series. So today is again going to be a very exciting series of questions and answers that we're going to have. The topic of today's webinar is Beyond Samples and Datasets and Building Academia and Clinical Collaborations. And for the same, we have guests Meera and Nikita today, and the interlocutor for the day is going to be Madhura. So Madhura is a translational cancer biologist at Prashanti Cancer Mission, Pune, and she's going to be the one who's going to take forward the session today. So just a heads up that we are also going to have our next YI Huddle in the month of February, which is going to happen on the 16th of February. And it's again going to be a very exciting webinar where we are going to discuss hows and whys of public engagement, citizen science and outreach. And we have very exciting guests like Sarah and Arnab and Mayuri as the interlocutor for the day. So just keep an eye on all our social media handles, and the registrations are going to begin very soon. And for today's webinar, I'll let Madhura take over. And yeah, Madhura, you can go forward.
Thank you so much, Arushi. Welcome, everyone. And it's a privilege to be part here discussing about academic clinician collaboration. I think all three of us are chosen pretty well in the field, especially Dr. Nikita, Dr. Meera. Both have very strong pursuit in research, being a clinician. Very strong hold and interest, enthusiasm coming into research. I myself, I'm fundamentally a molecular biologist, basic scientist, and last 10 years working with a clinician pretty closely. So I'm transiting from basic research to clinical research through translational research. I believe the two, Dr. Meera and Dr. Nikita, coming from clinical side towards basic research, transiting through translational. So I think it's a very good interface for all three of us to discuss. And it's a privilege to talk to both of you, Dr. Nikita and Dr. Meera. So brief introduction about both of them. Dr. Meera, she is working on autism. She's at NIMHANS, a pretty well-established lab. She has experience at NIH through her Fulbright Fellowship. She has been an early career fellow with Welcome DBT. And I see that her research work is quite well appreciated through the field, especially with autism and early intervention to detect and intervene to work on autistic early within first year of age of kids. About Dr. Nikita, she's a medical oncologist working at Cancer Institute, Adyar, Chennai. And as I see, despite being quite busy with molecular, as a molecular oncologist, she is devoting her time to research. She's pursuing PhD, looking at link RNA and in associated hematological malignancies, right? Would be privileged to know about their transition from clinician to research. But before we go into the details, probably we'll jump into understanding how it is for them to work at the interface of being a clinician, working with researchers, taking their research forward. Probably I'll add my couple of cents in between of my experience coming from basic scientist going towards clinical science and translational science. So should we jump into question answers, Dr. Meera and Nikita?
Yes.
We're good to go, right? So let's start with our very first question. So I believe everyone who wants to come to the interface of translational research or transit between clinical and basic research, the question is how can academia and or clinics move beyond traditional collaborations centered just based on samples and data sets to achieve more comprehensive and in-depth partnership to achieve bigger picture goals. So to you, Dr. Meera, first.
Okay, so I'm going to start the conversation. All right. Thanks, Nikita, for that introduction. And hello, everybody. It's nice to meet you. I've heard so much about India Bioscience, been to a couple of the events, but it's nice to be on this side of the audience. So I think I just want to establish that for few who don't know about NIMHANS, so we do equal parts of research and clinical work, where there's a lot of clinical teaching. So I would say it's a privilege that we are able to work with basic scientists on our campus. And we have several initiatives that we have with institutes like NCBS, InSTEM, all in Bangalore. And so there are multiple opportunities in that sense. But what I would like to highlight for this question is what personally in my line of work as a speech language pathologist, I don't have much is being able to work with engineers and computer scientists, for example, those who specialize in automatic speech recognition models, AI, ML. And that's where I, as a young investigator myself, I'm attempting to move beyond traditional collaborations. I'm saying attempting, and I've not done it yet, but I want to share with you all what has worked for me, if that's okay, Madhura. So I'm starting with the known, something that all of us know. And I cannot stress enough on this aspect, because successful collaborations stand on mutual respect, stands on treating each other as equal partners. We say this, we are like, yeah, we both are equal, but the thought process has to be the same. And especially because we come from a very strong system where hierarchy has been set in, particularly in the clinical space. So we need to remind ourselves that no matter who the partner is, if they are partners, they're equal partners, and we value each other. And experience matters, there is no doubt about it. But we have to break away from a very strong hierarchy that we have set up. I don't know how many of you in the audience will agree with me, but I think that has really worked in our favor. It's hard to break that barrier, but it's worked. And I would like to call this as investing in a relationship. In this case, it's a collaboration. There has to be openness. So this is all general stuff. More importantly, what has worked for us to move beyond traditional collaborations, first and foremost, is attending joint lab meetings. I just don't understand the lingo. I used to never understand the lingo, the kind of words that our engineering folks would use. So just sitting in those meetings, maybe long, maybe short, but just getting to hear them over and over again using these terms, asking them questions, as silly as it can be, that made a big difference to be able to attend joint lab meetings. Another thing that really took off in the COVID pandemic during that time was hosting journal clubs, where articles were mindfully chosen such that once there was a clinical focus, another time it was basic science focus, and we would invite people from both groups. And so our understanding of each other, respect for each other, only grew through joint journal clubs, I would say. So all to achieve an understanding of each other's work, and really to be able to speak a common language. Again, I don't know how many of you agree with me, but the moment we start speaking a common, sorry?
Yeah, I totally agree. Go on, sorry.
Yeah. So understanding a common language, understanding and being able to speak common language for us, for our lab and the labs that we collaborate with, really helped us go beyond traditional collaborations. I was just talking to Nikita just a while ago about how it works in her space, but in our space, we are able to invite our collaborators to sit in on our clinical work. I mean, of course, there are ethical issues there, and we have to work through that. But being able to sit through some of our clinical work cases, to be able to go on clinical rounds itself is multidisciplinary. The same child in our case is viewed through multiple lenses, depending on which professional is seeing them. So an ability to be able to invite them to come in and sit on our clinical work has really helped us, again, to understand and speak a common language. It also helps us establish goals, our research goals better, I feel. The vice versa, when they are setting up a clinical question, to be able to involve clinicians from the get-go, whether it's to like even at the study design level, that I think has helped. The last thing that I'd like to say before I hand it over to Madhura is that in the clinical world, we've started to move a lot more into community engagement, participatory research. We involve key stakeholders, the ones who this research question eventually should help. We involve them in the process of asking questions, designing our research, trying to understand practical issues in rolling out a certain intervention, for example. So I know that for a while before that, it used to be the clinical folks who would engage with them. But now that we've brought in our academic folks into this discussion, I can see how much passion, the way we think about the question, the passion we share, a lot of things change because we're very quickly reminded about what is the ultimate goal of this project. How is it going to really help the people out there in the community in the kind of research that I do? So I think these are some of the things that I wanted to highlight from my space about how we could go beyond our traditional work collaborations. And if there's anything else that others would like to add, sure.
Yep. I think over to you, Dr. Nikita.
So I think, Meera, you've made my job fairly easy. You've gone over all the points broadly and in agreement with really everything you spoke about. So one thing that draws me to academia or to my organization is its history. It was set up in 1954. And really what's important is as a clinician who also works in lab research, I think it's important to sort of identify the reason I got into the lab was there were all these unmet needs that we were seeing. We, of course, also see large volumes of patients. And somewhere there was a gap. So I think I was very naive and I said, let's move on to the other side also to try and see if we can address that gap. But essentially, I think one is, it's very important for us to, of course, there are unmet needs which are different. Different regions face different kinds of unmet needs for in our case, our patients. But I also think unmet needs can be very institutional. Like, a institution probably has access to, different kind of setup, a different funding mechanism, manpower access and everything. And it can be different everywhere. So I think you've got to pick up what you can do within your organization and really identify those unmet needs, which might just be institutional. The vision of our institute, we've got 3 incredible visionaries that set up this organization. And the vision is really today's research is tomorrow's treatment, which was set up by late Dr. S. Krishnamurthy, who was the advisor of our organization. The ethos is service to all. And we're all the time working through how we provide, equity in the kind of care we provide across the socioeconomic strata. And in there, I think there are so many different issues to address. Even in terms of the lab research work that we did, we identified a technique that basically incorporated the use of a multi-turf mass spectrometry. And, DST had kindly provided this proteomics facility. And through that, we were able to identify a low-cost technique. So, the turnaround time, multi-turf, you can 92 samples in 20 minutes, you'll have the data. And we were able to really quickly analyze these samples. And on day 1, day 2, we could tell that, this is how we should sort of proceed towards our workup, because you can bring down the cost in terms of what biopsy, etc., you are going to do. And finally, with regard to the pandemic, of course, these were very difficult times. And all of us have had near and dear ones who it's been hard. But honestly, to look at the silver lining, I took to social media in, I think, March, April of 2020. And through social media and developing networks, whether it is most importantly within the country and colleagues abroad, these have led to several meaningful collaborations. And in terms of how closely we work with our colleagues in the lab on translational, I mean, we have a very small team, but my wonderful colleague, our project technical assistant, she's equally involved in everything that I'm doing. Even when we have clinical discussions, cell therapy is obviously one, major frontier for hematological malignancies. And she's there for those, or members interested are there in those clinical discussions as well.
Okay, that's fantastic, Nikita and Meera both. So I hear you. To summarize what both of you say, Dr. Meera's main point is to understand each other's lingo, for us to come on platform and create a platform to come together to be able to understand the lingo. And what Dr. Nikita is saying that understand the gap, realize what's the gap in your field of your working, and try to go towards reduce the gap so that you achieve better clinical outcomes for whatever field that you're working with. I absolutely agree with both of you. There is one more point I would like to add here, which is the mindset. The way clinicians are trained and the way researchers are trained, they have a very one-sided angle to look at it. In a way, the clinician is very patient-driven, and researchers don't have the patient-driven angle. They have a very question-driven angle. So it's very important to understand what their focus is and to be able to convey the focus to each other, to understand each other's focus. So it's very important that the researchers understand whatever questions you are addressing, trying to have answers for, should help patient ultimately, right? Rather than looking at just data and outcomes of the data. Patient service is the most important. And for a clinician, it's very important to understand the rigor of the science, the controls, the variations, and how do we incorporate that in our medical training thinking, right? So this is what is a collective understanding if you want to achieve the depth into the work together that we put in from a clinician and academic point of view. To carry forward, I would like to add further granular question to the same theme is how does the communication work in here? How do you make your communication effective to have a right direction to your question, to your whatever bigger, smaller question that you're bringing to the table? So Dr. Nikita, maybe first you can address.
So one thing is, to very quickly kind of explain this, I think all of us are equal partners in healthcare. And this is not just the scientists, clinicians, but it's also our patients. It's also their caregivers. So again, if I can talk about MALDI-TOF as an example, this was work we were doing together. And, we would have discussions with both the patients and the caregivers. We'd explain patterns, etc. There's already an alternate methodology that is available. But I think it's very important for all of us to acknowledge we have limitations. Now, if and when my project is over, or if and when, if I get an additional degree, that does not mean I have managed to replace my colleagues in the lab. So I think it's very important that we disclose our limitations. We've got to be very open about, you put it very nicely, Madhura, that, you've got to, you said one is patient driven and the other is question driven. It's very important for us to sit down together and say, how can we arrive at these solutions without any shortcuts, and bringing in as many people, whether it is within the institute. I mean, I was often told everything should be done within the four walls. Sometimes it's not possible to do some. Yes, it's very important you do it within the four walls. But oftentimes you're seeing patients, especially in oncology. I mean, this is obviously life and death every single day in hematological malignancy. Some of them, the mortality rates can be quite high. So I think it's very important that all of us come together. I mean, we have wonderful organizations that are bringing us all together, and we can't find all the solutions within the four walls. Sometimes, in order to bring down the time to complete these projects and come out with meaningful conclusions or recommendations, the group needs to be bigger and bigger, and we all need to, I think you attract your tribe, right? So you just meet, it's a journey and it's exciting.
Right.
So
Right. No, I agree. And to maintain the vastness of it and the effective communication and timely communication is quite important to have everybody on the board and maintain the momentum once everybody comes on board, right? Dr. Meera, do you want to add anything to this question?
I'm going to reiterate what Nikita said in that we have to know that we don't have the answers for everything. The moment we acknowledge that, it automatically opens doors for transparent communication, openness, and timely communication. I always err on the side of communicating rather than saying, oh, may not be, I may have misunderstood. No. If I feel that even I have the slightest doubt, I'd rather talk about it, even at the cost of a half an hour additional time. I know time is a big deal here, But yes, I'm actually reiterating what she said, but it's such an important point.
Absolutely, absolutely. However stupid the question, we think it's important that we talk about it and have the clarity, because you never know how the other side is thinking, right? We may not get the nuances. Yeah.
And you definitely don't want to have a breakdown, communication breakdown, unnecessary, right? When you really didn't. Yeah.
So I think both the sides, clinician and academia, should keep the momentum on and have the dialogue going forward. That's the key point, right? So in your experience, moving on to our next question, in your experience, what are the key elements that have helped you to define the successful academic clinician collaboration? Not just looking at samples and data, but beyond that. So who wants to go first? Dr. Meera?
No, I'm smiling because I feel like we've covered these points in various.
Okay. I agree.
I'll
so
allow
any
Nikita to
points,
go first then.
tiny points that you want to cover up?
It's like you talk about the same favorite point.
I know, it's going to be over and over again. Right.
Madhura,
So
could you give your perspective? I'm sorry, Meera, if I interrupted. I'm really
sure.
Madhura, we should hear from you, because you work on an area that's, I mean, breast cancer. It's the biggest. It's among the biggest problems we face in oncology. So tell us.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you asked me this question. How do we address this question? So I believe what I see around in Indian context, everyone comes up with their own way of coming up with a solution, so that clinicians and academicians can come to the same table to address quite a vast clinical problem. So in our case, I work on breast cancer, specifically focusing on triple negative breast cancers, because triple negative breast cancers, number one, there is no targeted therapy available for triple negative. The systemic therapy that's available today, currently given to the patients, show about 40 to 50% recurrence rate within a short period of time. And moreover, specifically in India, TNBC, triple negative breast cancers, is reportably of high prevalence, about 25 to 27%, compared to Western places like US and UK, where TNBC is only about 10 to 12%. So going forward, we need to focus our efforts to understand TNBC and, if possible, come up with any targeted therapies or manageable treatment plans for patients to do better. So the way we have come up with a solution, it's two visionaries, Professor L.S. Shashidhara and Dr. Kopikar, who's a breast oncosurgeon. Together, they had a vision to create a translational unit, and that's Center for Translational Cancer Research I'm part of, where I, as a molecular biologist, shuttle between an academic lab, which is in IISER Pune, and the breast cancer clinic, which is Prashanti Cancer Care Mission. So I spend 50% time in the clinic and the lab, and I interact with the clinicians and the radiologist during biopsy, the diagnosis, the follow-up treatment, quite one-on-one on a regular basis. So I understand the nitty-gritties and on the ground what things are happening, how the clinical data is collected and putting together from patient point of view and as a data statistical point of view as well. So it took me some time to switch my thinking from research orientation to understand clinical perspective, patient perspective, and this is my learning, and that's why that point came forward in the very first go. It was a fantastic learning, and it was a fantastic perspective to have along with when I think about the data, the statistics, and the research question that I want to address, that ultimately how many patients is going to help, how it's going to help the patient, how long it's going to take for me to get this out to the patients, right? So the platform that we created, where there are few more senior scientists that we work together who come from basic research background, work with the clinician very closely, work with patient data, patient samples pretty closely, and build the research question, build the cohort to address those research questions and bring it back to the clinic, discuss with the clinicians on how to take it back to the patients. So one of the very good example that I have from last 5 years, that we studied the TNBC cohort, we understand the expression of androgen receptor and how it affects our patients, and we're trying to take it back to the clinical trial with a repurposed drug against prostate cancer therapy, because AR is used as a targeted therapy in prostate cancer, to do clinical trials to directly benefit about 30 to 40% of TNBC patients with targeted therapy that's available today in the market, FDA approved. So it's immensely helped us to have a close-knit interaction between clinicians and academicians to come forward and to come up with some meaningful outcomes in the end. So all the points that we discussed so far, that having a dialogue, having time together, having the depth, communication ongoing, has definitely come up to a good outcome. So that's very individual. I see a way of handling how academic and clinician collaborations work, in my opinion, and I'm sure there are multiple ways that you have seen being handled at various different platforms. Yeah.
I think another point, this is an extension to the discussion on unmet needs, is we really need to look at best ways to not reinvent the wheel. And for that, we need to have discussions. I mean, both sides, right? Everyone needs to sit down together. I could have an idea, and my colleague, she's wonderful, and she was telling me, she's like, no, this exact thing got published a couple of months ago. So, I think that's very important to constantly discuss about, say for, if again, we had to, any malignancy for that matter, if there are many diagnostic tests already available, or prognostic markers for a particular malignancy already available, how are we going to add to it? So something, if I have to talk about multiple myeloma, it is a very common form of blood cancer, which is seen in the elderly population. Now, there are already several staging systems available with several variables. So if we are going to develop a marker, are we really seeking to replace the present systems that are validated? I mean, lakhs and lakhs of samples across the world. So I think we need to be focused. We need to identify those unmet needs. They could be pharmacogenomics. There could be some of our patients having unusual side effects. Identify those needs and really focus on that instead of saying, I am going to identify this new way to stage multiple myeloma. You can do that in one institution, but I think in our own institution, why would we follow that protocol? So I think collaboration. I mean, our colleagues in AIMS New Delhi, they've done some wonderful work on, staging systems in India for multiple myeloma with AI algorithms. So now we're very happy to provide our data sets, and we're trying to see if it will work in our patient population. I mean, why do the same thing all over again? We can try and look at different areas together.
Right. I think maybe we can take some of the questions from the audience here, which is quite linked with what we're discussing. So Ashwin Kumar is asking, do you think the curriculum and the training in medicine plays a great role in the thought process, which I feel is a bit lacking in the basic science or biotechnology? Does the gap in understanding human body and disease is a barrier for people in biotechnology or basic science? That could be a barrier in effective discussion and collaboration.
Can I?
Yep, go ahead. Yep.
So there was a meeting recently in IIT Bombay, and there were scientists from everywhere, and a lot of engineers. And we were talking about the anatomy of the urinary bladder. And I had to stop in no time because the things they were answering. So I think it's all, I think we focus on areas. We can better talk about things at length. Agree with you. I mean, we cannot know everything right from the beginning, but once you start focusing on various areas, whether it is someone with a medical background, MBBS or a BDS, or someone with an engineering background, biotechnology, I was fascinated by the discussion and how much I learned. I actually wrote down some of those ligaments names, and I said I'll go back and revise. So yeah.
Right. I think it's a vastness of the field. So you have to choose your questions. You have to choose the gap that you're focusing on, as what you mentioned, Dr. Nikita. And to add it to here, the onus is on us also, the basic researchers, right? To understand what organ are we studying and how does it play, what is the mechanism that, so as a scientist, we are going to ask a question, how does this drug work? What is the mechanism of the drug action? The clinician is going to ask, what is the chance that this drug is cure the patient, right? They're not worried about the mechanism of the drug action, right? So you have to come halfway towards understanding how it's going to help the patient, how long it's going to take to help the patient. You can work on the mechanism part on your side, but you cannot lose sight of having a patient cured part, right? And there you may not need to understand the anatomy, but the physiology and the drug physiology basically is things that come into play. So it depends on the question, I believe. Dr. Meera, do you want to add in here?
I just want to say that at one level, I do agree with Ashwini Kumar that there has to be some kind of a curriculum, some kind of thing built into the curriculum. But then eventually, when you choose to specialize in the area, I agree with the two of you that we will get into that and go. And this is a place where you can, go to the clinicians and sit with them, listen to stories, listen to how things are done, and the vice versa. But I just want to say that I want to say that there is some merit in thinking about including this in the curriculum. That's all is what I'm saying. But the vastness will limit it. Some amount of training, or I think I've seen this in the US. I don't know about other places. Maybe in India too, I may not know about it enough, that you can rotate in different labs, rotate in different clinics where you can get this experience if that's what the student wants. So,
Right,
yeah.
right. Very good point to be added here. So I'll move on to our next question in line is how do we envision now? So we've established how we should work together in between clinical and academic interface. But if you want to go forward in India, in the space worldwide, how do we envision the future of academia clinic partnership, particularly in the context of advancing healthcare outcomes?
Yeah.
So, can I?
Yeah, please, Dr. Nikita.
I think one is, of course, like we were talking about collaboration. Collaboration is key. Getting to know everyone around you. Going to conferences it's also important to network with everyone. Spend time with undergraduates, with the most senior faculty members, etc. It's very important to acknowledge we have even the ongoing project, but there is another epidemiology study. It's important to acknowledge the advantages you get from industry. To say everything is possible in academia sometimes is difficult because, if you're going to sample a large, obtain samples from a large sample size, in order to provide reports, etc., blood tests to normal participants, sometimes it's not going to be possible to do everything within one institute. You need to identify partners with the right certifications. Essentially, accountability and transparency is key. But the other very important point is constantly engaging with policymakers. And they are very interested in knowing what we are doing and what we're looking at. Even in terms of reinventing the wheel, one is sometimes you can identify low-cost solutions, whether it's therapeutics or diagnostics. So it's okay to do something meaningful in that space as well. But I think there needs to be crosstalk between. Sometimes I feel we're just discussing amongst ourselves in some different. I'm referring to a project in my mind. But I think if we can engage with policymakers also, it makes a huge difference. And I think we're in beautiful times across the country. Everyone's very interested in engaging and seeing how they can help improve the system and make it more user-friendly. So I think we should make the most of this interest that we're seeing from everywhere in STEM. And yeah.
Madhura, was there something that, I thought you said something about in terms of advancing healthcare outcomes and
Right, that's right.
Yeah. I was just thinking whether I wanted to add in, this is different from what Nikita just mentioned, but just as an example, maybe, so the way I'm thinking about in terms of advancing of healthcare outcomes, I just want to highlight one point, which is, I think, less discussed because of the field that I come from. For example, we look at our lab. There are many of them in the lab, many of the members who actually worked on this problem on the on the meeting today. So for example, we look at parent-child interaction, and we know that very early intervention, we're not even talking about diagnosis of autism, but we know that these infants are at high likelihood. And so we try and see whether very early interactions have a role in helping children and the family at large. So a lot of these things are heavily, are a lot of work that we do is human resource heavy, that we end up listening to these samples, segmenting these samples, annotating these samples as the mother spoke this, the child said this was the interaction, this was directive interaction, not directive. And there are thousands of variables like that. So I feel at some point we should be able to, at least in our space, work with our computer scientists or engineers to be able to automatize this whole process. It's not easy. It's a very dynamic thing. Every sentence that I speak has a different, I mean, it's just dynamic. Speech itself is dynamic, but this is such an important area for us, and we live and breathe this every day in the lab. If we do address this problem, I know that we can free up a lot of our time to do other kinds of things. So I'm just trying to see whether an example here, which is from a very different field, would help our audience who are listening in to think about how we can envision like a academic clinical partnership, and especially in advancing, I wouldn't call it a healthcare outcome, or actually in our world, that is an outcome for us, but then trying to make a lot of these things automatic processing pipelines through automatic speech recognition models is an example that, I mean, and a hope that I have for our field. And this is where we really need to collaborate with our academic colleagues. I don't know whether this was an appropriate place to throw this in, but I just
that's
thought.
a very good point. And actually in the chat box, there are many questions linked with computational biology. So I'm going to take that up at the end together, so that, because that's a futuristic angle for us to take it forward too. So I think it addresses one of the questions that is asked here. Like there is a paper called Every Biology is Computational Biology. Want to know what the panel thinks. So I think you address that it's quite essential in the questions that we are asking these days to make them comprehensive, broader, and not miss the things that a human mind and thinking is going to miss, right? Before we move on to our next few questions, I'd like to take a question that's more specific here, addressed to Dr. Meera. Could you share, so this is Murli MS asking, could you share some tips on how you were able to approach clinical collaborations? How did you address the hierarchy situation with clinicians? Example, one clinician asks me to come at 10 p.m. One thinks I'm trying to steal the data. One kept the patient and control data classification from me while I was running between the group statistical tests, which he's unable to understand, etc. So how do you manage? That's the question.
And I'm not smiling to dismiss this question. Murli, we hear you. There are several such narratives. I mean, I can't even begin to point it out. I think it's getting better in some places. But to be very specific on the first question, I don't think I can answer it elegantly. I mean, I can answer this very well because I am a clinician and I work in a clinical setup, but I can answer it from the space of multidisciplinary work. So I come from a speech language background. I work with child psychiatrists. One of my colleagues is on the call here. I work with adult psychiatrists, with neurologists, anything, I mean, within the NIMHANS space. So in that sense, how do we approach clinical collaborators? I wouldn't say it's easy. You have to get to know the system. They have to accept you as a part of their system. But I don't take no for an answer. If they've said, no, I'm not interested, or they just, shrug their shoulders, I go back. What do I lose? I go back. I never take it personal. I mean, this is just my philosophy. I'm not saying that it works for everybody. Don't get me wrong. But I really don't take a no for answer. And I tell myself that maybe they didn't understand me. Go back again. Show them what is it that's making me so passionate about this question. And this has worked. Now I've reached a stage where people know that this is what she comes with. But until you reach that point, I think at the cost of sometimes feeling bad, self-esteem, etc. Yes, but I feel like we should go back and talk. So I don't know whether this answer helps you, but that's how I would deal with it, or I've dealt with it. I'm dealing with
time it answers. So I'll add my experience, if I may, Dr. Meera and Murli also. So my approach was quite similar to Dr. Meera's. My very first clinician collaboration that I established, that was in Singapore from a hospital. And I went to her with my question, asking her to come on board to write a grant together. It was a bed to bedside grant. I showed her my data. I showed her my presentation, like, this works beautifully in the cell system and in the mouse. I want to see if it's true in the patient samples. The very first few questions that she came up with got me flat. I had no answers. In a way, like, do you know even if it's expressed in the cells in breast cancer? I had no answer to that question. If you find out that it is expressed and you have a drug, if at all, to target this, do you know what's going to be the physiology of the drug transition? And do you know how many number of patients is going to help? I had no answer to these questions, right? So I go back to the drawing board, whatever literature I have available from the clinical perspective. I have some direction, go back to her. I have my answers. She asked me next 10 questions. This dialogue went back and forth for like 6-7 months. One grant cycle went away. I did not lose hope. I did not give up. I kept on going back. And finally, by the end of 7 months, she was convinced. She came on board. We wrote a grant together. We got a grant. We got beautiful data out, and it's gone forward. I'm taking that work forward even after like 7 years. So yeah, persistence and having conviction in what you're working with, right? So these two things play off. And to address the second part of your question, I think trust is also very important, right? So the way you communicate, what you bring on the table, that's what builds trust. And without trust, I think it's very difficult to have any collaboration ongoing within researchers, within clinicians, and across borders also.
Yeah, and this is where I will very gently push back. As much as I said, I'm willing to go back and ask. In this place, if there is the mutual trust is an issue, somebody is not giving you data, I would definitely push back, or I would be careful about the collaboration. I wouldn't expect you, Murli, or anyone in your place to, adjust to that situation. That is not a word I would, even recommend. So for that, and for the other part, which is 10 p.m., 8 p.m., 6 p.m., I don't know, this is complete. I'm hoping everybody here will agree with me, but I really think we need to have a very good balance about work and life. And so I don't know how much it's possible, but at least in the space that I work,
Dr.
again,
Nikita is
I
smiling
know I
on that
come from a
question.
privileged space,
Yeah.
but I definitely will let them know that, hey, in my case, I have dance to teach in the evening. I can't come at 10. That's equally important for me. So I will negotiate. I will talk to them. I won't push back every time 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the evening. No, I may make a small compromise, but not at the cost of losing out on something that is very important for me outside my academic career. So I think it's different ways to do it with different people if they're being difficult collaborators.
Right. Dr. Nikita, do you want to add anything?
I think, again, if I can sort of give an example, I had an idea in 2018, and I discussed the idea with several colleagues in several colleagues. But finally, the project took fruition in 2023, and we're starting the project now. So I think there was this Nobel laureate who once said, sit back, watch quietly, look all around you. And finally, when you found people who you trust and who trust you back, you then talk about the question.
Yeah.
So, even in terms of the kind of collaborators that were there initially, it's very different from what it looks today. And, members who you trust in and around within your system. And it's very important to identify different groups, like an epidemiology, if it is an epidemiology project, to approach the epidemiologists who will give you the right answers. You can question them constantly and they won't be troubled. You can ask them silly questions and it's okay. I think that's 2018 to 2023, 5-6 years. So I think we should be patient, and I agree it comes from a lot of privilege. I agree with Meera that work-life balance is important, but I've seen some labs in oncology, and they're happy people working 24/7, and I look forward to a lab like that. But someone today said, I'd like to leave at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, and I said, yeah, why not? Whether it was justified or not. If they feel it is justified, then yes. So you can't, and especially, salary structure, etc., distance, sometimes we live closer. And in some institutes, everyone's sort of living on campus. So I guess it's possible to have that, 24/7 lab culture. But I completely look forward to a 24/7 lab, and only with that. People who want to hang around, okay. People who want to. The other thing is WFH, work from home. I mean, you had all these organizations during COVID saying, we're working from home. But in academia, I think there were not many who warmed up to the idea. Sometimes, especially if you're doing a lot of the lab work and if you need your computer, you need to stay focused on it. There need to be systems. Of course, there's obviously a risk of misuse, etc. But I think these are things we can all look to.
Absolutely.
And in my experience, I feel like, at least from the lab that I am very fortunate to have a lab like that. When I think it's mutual, right? When we see our lab members working in a certain way, when they see me, automatically we will know that, hey, we shouldn't be breaking this trust. I'm working from home today, maybe, yes. I'm not going to clock hours, but then end of the day, I also want to feel good. So I think it over time, as a relationship grows between a mentor and a mentee or lab members, many of these things sort of, there might be one or two off cases, yes, but overall, I think when you set a good model and you expose them to other good models, it works.
Yeah. Maybe 2 points I'd like to add here. The time also concept works differently for a clinician and an academician.
Yes.
So I work with an oncosurgeon. He starts his surgeries at 6:30 in the morning. Goes on with 3-4 surgeries until 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Then he goes to OPD. His OPD runs until 7 o'clock. So if I want to talk to him, it is going to be after 7 or before 6:30 in the morning. Right? So I have to understand how he's working. I cannot say that I cannot talk to you at 6:30 in the morning. Otherwise, I won't be able to talk to him. Right? And research is a free flow. Like, you decide how you want to work, as long as you have the outcome within a defined period of the times, because you have to report to the grants, we have to publish papers and all. So it depends on how it suits you, depends on how you want to run your lab.
No, I totally agree. It's also field dependent and the kind of work that we do. Yeah.
Right. So moving on, we've established that the trust is important, the communication is important, having the right question, understanding the gap is important. The next challenge is the funding. Yeah, so I'm going to go to the funding question for us. Seeking funding for collaborations can be challenging, right? So what strategies have proven for each of you that are effective in securing support for academic clinician collaborative projects? Yeah,
I'm smiling and I'm going to take this first. And
okay.
I don't know if being this correct is okay in this call, but I will still be honest about this. Apparently, the buzzword is machine learning for me in my space right now. Last year, I've had multiple grants written, and like I spoke to you all a couple of days ago, it didn't work out. But the 2 grants that came through are things that we have worked with our academic colleagues where there is machine learning involved. So, I mean, I don't know, I'm just being honest here. I'm not saying that we should like fabricate grants with machine learning just to get a grant. No, there are umpteens opportunities within my work, my kind of research work, where machine learning has its place, especially because we work on automatic speech recognition models. I work on speech and language disorders. So, and I'm saying this because just 2 days ago in our lab meeting, we had this discussion. That's why I smiled when that question came up, and I was like, the buzzword in funding at this point in our space seems to be collaborative work, which I think is a given for most fields. And at this point, machine learning grants written on with focus on a clinical question where machine learning is combined seems to be going on. Next year, it may be LMMs, like large language models. But then more serious answer to this, in my opinion, would be to spend time writing down the different kinds of grants that you can apply to. I think we undervalue that point. We think that there are these 6 sets of grants, and we look at this grant every year, March, this will open up. I think we have to invest time in looking at multiple websites, looking at people who've researched in similar areas. A lot of grants are available, international grants for international students, young faculty, anybody who wants to do. So I think my answer to that would be, you have to, yes, respond to the call. There has to be a match between what you write and what the call is for, but also to look beyond the usual funders. I think you have to invest in time to find that. And there are certain people who are really good at it. And so mentoring in that area really matters. I think there's a question on mentoring. Maybe if you have time, we can take that up. But that's my first point to this question. And I'll allow Nikita to respond, or Madhura, you could, and I'll come back if I have anything else.
Sure, Dr. Nikita.
I don't have too much to add. I agree with, of course, I'm in complete agreement with what Meera just said. Yeah, I think you have to, India is the 5th largest economy in the world. and we're hoping we continue to meet the right people who are interested in funding our research, whether the whether grants, prestigious grants from the government of India, or I mean, DBT Wellcome Trust, outstanding. It's very difficult. But also looking at other ways of funding from private sources, CSR, etc. All of that is very important. And I think what I really like is in terms of, for example, if it is CSR funding, etc., they also hold you accountable. And I think we should be open to that transparency, that much transparency and accountability. If they want to look at our work on a weekly basis or whatever it is, we should be all set to show that amount of transparency and accountability, and also those outcomes. So getting the funds, but also what are we going to do with it, and are we going to have the answer, etc. I think it's all about networking. It's all about meeting people everywhere, and writing grants, etc. together.
Yeah. And sometimes I feel that some of the institutes, again, you can say that's a privileged position, or it's over the years, the institute has developed that kind of a research environment, may be adept at a certain set of things. So while we're thinking about collaborators, we think about an individual, their work, yes, but we also think about the institution, because there might be some things already set in motion there. It may be a well-oiled, I mean, that particular lab may have this. So what I'm trying to say is, especially if you're a first-time grant writee, if you are from a, I don't know whether this is the right word, less known institute is a wrong word, I know, but I don't know what else I can replace that with. Or a young
Maybe new
institute
who has
a
yet to
younger institute, I
establish,
would say, who are just developing things.
Yeah.
Seeking out mentorship is one, and second, if there is a good fit in that particular place, you have to go that extra mile to talk to that person and get that person on board. I feel many times, at least for me, it worked when I could show them that I have this established relationship with an organization where this kind of research has happened. They've shown that they can do it. So that mentoring will definitely help me do it, carry this out in X institute. So all I'm trying to say is sometimes tagging along with other institutes and collaborators, putting that effort to do it, even if it's the first time you're meeting that person, may be worth it. Because funding agencies look for such things, and understandably.
Absolutely agree with you, Dr. Meera.
Understandably.
Yes.
Yeah.
At CTCR, we approach all different funding sources. So CTCR is funded by a CSR or funds. We also avail DBT, DST funds. So we do approach quite diverse funding agencies, and we have been successful so far. I would say 10-20% of the times. So moving on, I'm going to take one of the questions from the audience, but to put the premise for that, like all three of us, the way we are putting forward, I see that the way clinicians and academicians are coming together are bottom-up approach, like individual driven, how you want to come together, establish your understanding, trust, and build it together, right? Individual driven. The way we have seen in US or outside world, Singapore, it's mostly policy driven or the structure driven, where they have programs for clinicians and academicians to come together, apply for grants. And once the grants come through, they start working together, right? So the question pertains to the same, like why India does not have MD, PhD combined programs like in the US, which are also structurally driven, policy-driven programs to have better outcomes, to have research clinician mindset together, right? So let's address both the sides together, like why do we have such programs, why so less? And if the policy point can come in, Dr. Nikita, how can we expand this base in India, right? Yeah.
So I think a lot of institutes are setting up MD, PhD programs, and I believe some of them have taken off. A lot of them haven't been able to, bring in as many candidates to pursue a PhD after the MD. But honestly, if I have to talk about my experience when I completed my medical oncology training in 2017, someone quite senior in my organization asked me what I was interested in. And I talked about something that's very different from what I do today. I was talking about something in solid cancers that involved intraperitoneal chemotherapy for colorectal cancers and gastric cancers. But at the end of 1 year, I was only talking about hematological malignancies. And, when I finished, there may have been, I don't know what reasons there were for me. Maybe I was inspired by the faculty members I was interacting with, which is why I said this is the area I want to work in. But I think after 1 year, I said I would give myself that time to understand what I actually was interested in. And it took that entire year to sort of to think about what I wanted to do. And the PhD was, or getting into a PhD program, it's obviously there are so many different challenges in, thinking about it, registering for a PhD, getting the registration. It comes in retrospect. It's dated, 1 year, you get the document in 21, but it says you started it in March 2020. And I'm like, what is going on? Then I'm waiting for the fund, and the fund takes time. And then the second year's grant does not come through. And then I'm writing to them and I'm like, see, I was, it was connected to this grant, but this is
Yeah.
but I'm not going to completely blame colleagues, I mean, on the granting agency, because it's possible that I was annoying them. The UC and SOEs, etc. I think they were like, we are going to trouble you because you're not getting it right. So the systems, I think we need a lot of structuring within systems. There are enough number of roadblocks that, which is what I'd love to tell the policymakers. You're giving the money, but are we meaningfully, using it? We are meaningfully using it. But the point is, can we, save some funds and do something else with it? Or you need structures in place to ensure there are no errors when we're submitting documents. The solution is not for us to become accounts experts and, finance experts and everything. You need you need teams that, project managers, you need large teams. There are wonderful models already in place, whether it is outside India. There are some models within the country. I take my PhD co-guide is from CMC Vellore. So I'm very, very inspired by their system and the way their labs are functioning, etc. So I think there's a lot of learning we need to do, learn from each other. We have within our own systems, there are lots of advantages. I mean, one way was to engage with administrators, etc., in talking about how important it was to, urgently take up these projects, to take them to the ethics committee, meet the quorum, etc. We cannot wait for the 3-month deadline because, this particular trial will help patients, or this particular, we've identified, you get some seed funding within your, sometimes within the lab, the PI is kind and will give you access to some money. So you have preclinical data and you'd like to get an ethics committee clearance. I think these things are, we have a wonderful system in place in regards to that. That is, if there is an urgency for a particular project, we can engage with our leaders. And if they see merit, then, they convene meetings even earlier than the already preset meetings. But yes, I think all the solutions, should the PhD, should it have taken this long? The answer is no, it shouldn't have. And what I mean, how can we improve things? Because tomorrow, if I go and tell my medical oncology trainee that you will start the PhD program and you'll finish after XYZ years, they will be like, why? So, you've got to bring it down and it's both, even the scientists, for them, why should it take that long? Right? So I think we all have to come together, and translational research is beautiful because look at the number of ideas and all of us coming together. It's very important to engage with our leaders, but makers, because in one organization, if you can bring about change, that's not sufficient. We are at the end of the day, there's immense unity and diversity, but we need to think of the entire nation also as a whole. So in that sense, I think it'll be important to engage with policymakers.
That's absolutely well said, Dr. Nikita. As we build, there is quite a lot of enthusiasm that we see as we build from bottom up. There is a need for intervention from top to bottom also to create platforms for people like us to take things forward with a steam, right? Not just start and then figure out and stall while figuring it out. Right, so the policy intervention and having good amount of support from funding perspective and the platforms perspective is definitely going to help us moving forward. And I would like to say sorry to many good questions, but in interest of time, we won't be able to take them through. Perhaps we can answer them on platform YouTube, right? So the video will be put up on YouTube and we can attempt answering those questions on that platform. Yeah, so please look up for the answers over there. Thank you very much, Dr. Nikita, Dr. Meera. It has been a wonderful discussion and quite a good insight into academia clinician collaboration space that we have put out, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. And your role is also much appreciated.
Yes.
Otherwise, there's a tendency to jump in and answer in excitement, but I think you held us, at least me, in a way that it was a meaningful discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Madhura, Nikita, and Meera, to be here with us and help make the session better. And we look forward to engaging with people like you to keep holding on to such sessions for all the Indian science community. So thank you so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful day ahead.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, and wonderful Twitter line. Bye.